So in this video, I'm going to discuss something called data types. So let's just go back to our drawing boards because I want to explain this very clearly. So what are data types, right? So for example, right, data types in JavaScript. So for instance, if I write something like 3579, right, versus something like Siddharth, right? There is a fundamental difference between these two. This is a number, this is a name, right? Or this is like a word, right? Let's say I can say tree, right? This is a basically a word, right? How you store them is dependent on variables, but what is this type of data for us humans, maybe like, or actually not for humans, for in our colloquial language we say this is a number, this is a word. In JavaScript you are basically saying that this is a number, correct? This is a string, right? So yeah, that's the fundamental difference that we are trying to say, right? Now what are these data types in JavaScript? So there are two kinds of data types, right? So one is called primitive, the other one is called objects, right? And today in this video I'm just going to discuss on the primitive ones. So if we look at primitive, so there's a few here, right? So first is the one that we would understand, which is a number, then a string, which is a word, then we have null, we also have undefined, we also have something called boolean, right? We also have big int, and we have something called a symbol. And I'm going to discuss the difference in each of these. Maybe not big int that much, but yeah, the difference is this. So when you are defining a number, right? So let's say let num equals some number, right? 979921, right? Something like that. Don't worry, this is not the first letters, first numbers of my phone number, but yeah, 979921, for example, right? Let name is equals Siddharth. So there's a fundamental difference here. For numbers, we are not using quotes, all right? For strings, we are using some quotes. In fact, you can use something like single quotes as well, and that would still work, right? Can you store decimals in numbers? Yes, you can. 1 2 3 4 5, something like that, right? But how big can this number be? So this number can only be big to the point of 2 to the power of 53. So if you understand powers, 10 square is 1 with 2 zeros, 10 cube is 1 with 3 zeros, 10 to the power 4 is 1 with 4 zeros, right? But 2 to the power 53, so it would go something like 2 4 8 16 32 till the point of 2 to the power of 53, right? And it goes in both ways. It can go both in minus to the plus. So minus 2 to the power 53 to plus 2 to the power 53. That's how big the number can be, and that's, for all intents and purposes, that's good enough, right? Unless you're working with really big numbers in something like crypto or like computational science, or like in supercomputing and all of that, where you need to be very precise, that's where you need something called a big int. All right, this is a data type that covers large numbers, but for all intents and purposes, I am not going to use it here, or neither do I understand how to use it. So that's three types. Now what's undefined, right? Let's say I say console.log num, I'll give a space, and then I'll say name, right? If I save it, I go to my page, I'll reload, we can see these console.logs, right? What if I say let a, all right, and I am going to say a, right? So you will see undefined comes up. That's because with a we have not defined any value, right? What is null then? Null is something where you are explicitly stating that this variable contains nothing. It's not zero, it's not an empty string, it's just null. There's nothing inside this. So if I say let name 2 equals this, right? Even then, if I say name 2, right, and I reload, I still get a nothing, right? And that's not the same as null. Null only works when you say null, right? Right? Then you see this null value here. So when would you typically use it? You would typically use it when you are creating new accounts in your code, say user, and the first user has not been made, but you need to declare the variable, and you say that user equals null, right? And later on you will start filling in it with objects or variables or new values, right? So yeah, that's the whole idea. What else? Let's say now we have discussed now number, begin, string, null, undefined. What's a boolean? Let's say boolean is equals true, right? So when you say true, you basically use it during conditional statements, like okay, if this equals this, then true, right? One of the examples is if I say that this value, let's say num1 equals 123, and let num2 equals 123, right? And I want to know if num1 equals num2, right? Yeah, are they both the same numbers? So if I go to my document, yeah, you see true value. If I change the numbers to 124, it returns false because 124 is not equal to 123. So that's the use of true and false. Basically, it tells the code what statements are true and what are not, and when do you need to skip them, right? What else? There's symbol. Okay, this one I found very interesting. It is called a primitive data type apparently, but it follows some nature of objects. So let's say, for example, I say let id is equal to new symbol, right? Right? And then you can say id equals symbol id, right? Now if I try to print this id, for example, okay, sorry, it's not a constructor, so let's say for this, yeah, you see symbol id written here, right? What like, but does that mean I just stored symbol id inside this? No. What it does, basically, symbol, is that it creates a unique identifier against id, right? So let's say I have two symbols, all right? Let id1 equals symbol, let id2 equals symbol as well, right? And what I'm going to say is id1 has a symbol id, which is the description. So this id is the description. we can say id x. All right, id2 equals also, let's say, symbol id x, right? All right, now do you think this id1 is equal to id2? Because they have the same description, right? So why not test that? Let's say id1 equals id2, right? So if they are equal, it should print true, right? No, it prints as false, because no matter how many symbols you create, even if they have the same description, they will be treated as unique. All right, so where does this work? So for instance, I have uh, user1 password and user2 password, right? And I want two different keys to be created for each user, right? So I need to make sure that user1 password never matches to user2 password, right? Because I want to create unique values for them, right? So that is the idea of a symbol. You, no matter what you want, let's say you want to create properties or descriptions to certain identities that keep them unique, right? For instance, let's say the typical scenario would be you create a user1 and you create a user2, all right, and you create user1 symbol. You want user1 symbol to have a password and user2 symbol to have a password. Not necessarily a password, I'm just using password as a term here, but technically it could be a, account key or something like that. That is very unique, because two users can create the same passwords. That's true, obviously. But do you want user1 and user2 to be identified through something? Could be an identifier, right? Let's say we say identifier, right? Identifier, right? And we want user1 password to be user1 identifier to be different from user2, right? False, right? Can I change this? So for instance, user1, and I am going to say identifier equals pass1, user2 identifier equals pass2, right? Now I want to print or console.log user1 uh, user1 identifier comma user2 identifier, and then whether it's true or false. Identifier is not defined. Is it user? I have to use dot, right? I think I have to use dot. Dot, dot. Identifier is not defined. So I'm making some mistake here. Oh, sorry, I got this wrong. I was reading a documentation. I'll link this article to the video as well. So basically, I got the use case slightly wrong. So for instance, you have, um, a user. All right. User is, let's say, John. All right. All right. What you ideally want is, uh, let's create this. Let's say ID. All right. And you want user ID to be 1, right? Now you can say what is the user ID, identify the user themselves, and let's say actually let's say the user is comma user comma with user comma user dot sorry with id description comma valued comma user dot id. All right, so basically what I'm doing here is id. Right, what I'm saying is id is a unique identifier, and I am giving user, who is John, a user id of 1, and I want to print the user is John with user id description is id here, valued at user id. Let's test this if this works. Yes, the user is John with user id valued undefined. Why is this undefined? So if I go to the article here, I think I made another mistake somewhere. So ideally I can say user id equals 1. Alright, that's what I've done. Let id equal symbol id. Oh, yeah, I need to put this as square brackets instead of dot. So if I say square bracket, yes, now it should work. Undefined, why? User id is equal to 1. The user is user. What if I use something like, no, should work. Okay, if I put it as an object, let's say name John, and I'll come to objects later. I think we should have gone ahead and discussed objects first before going into symbol. Yes, the user is name John, symbol id 1 with user id valued at 1. Doesn't work with strings, it works with object only. I think I'll come back to this topic again when I discuss object kind data types, and then we'll see. All right, so yeah, these are the different data types, and we are done with primitive ones. We'll go to the object ones and then probably come back to symbol.